It was the middle of the night when something pulled Mira from sleep. She sat up, listening. At first, there was only silence. Then she heard it. A low, rising howl of wind, angry and alive as it pressed against the house. The storm had arrived, and something inside her turned cold. But then she noticed something else. The steady hum of the furnace was gone. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. Mira turned toward the doorway, making out only the faint outline of a figure standing there. "The power's out," Lauren said, her voice raspy with sleep and unsteady in a way that hinted at something deeper than the moment. Mira let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Well, we can't complain, I guess." It held out longer than expected. She squinted into the darkness, barely able to make out Lauren's shape. "So now what?" As if in answer, a faint flicker came from the hallway. The small nightlight behind Lauren glowed, slowly revealing her face. The light wavered, then steadied, and a moment later a soft hum rose from the kitchen as the refrigerator came back to life. Lauren's shoulders eased, and she ran a hand through her hair. "The solar has kicked in," she said, relief slipping into her voice. "Oh. But shouldn't the furnace have come back on?" "No." Lauren was already turning. "Come on. We need to relight the wood stove and I'll explain." Mira slid out of bed, already feeling the slight drop in temperature. She followed Lauren into the living room and cautiously flipped the wall switch, feeling relieved if confused when only one lamp turned on. She brought some logs over and lit the fireplace while Lauren checked the stove. After a few moments, both fires were going, their light softening the room. "Okay. So what's the situation with the furnace?" Mira asked. "Well," Lauren said, glancing back at her, "the solar system kicked in like it's supposed to. But it's not set up to run everything." Mira frowned. "It can't?" "It could," Lauren admitted, "but it would drain the batteries fast. And with the panels buried, we're not getting any charge back." Mira swallowed a flash of terror as she remembered lying in a dark room, sub-zero temperatures cutting through her until she felt nothing. "What about the one I brought?" she asked anxiously. Lauren shook her head. "We need to save that for now." She stepped closer, gently guiding Mira to the sofa. "We need to make what we have last as long as possible, before we switch fully to the propane. The solar system as it stands will power a few lights, the television, the refrigerator and the internet. That should last us for a few days, if we're careful." "What good will that do if we freeze to death?" Mira snapped, but her frustration vanished at the hurt expression on Lauren's face. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "It's all right," Lauren replied, her voice softening. "I know this isn't ideal. But we can close off the rest of the house, keep the heat in here. Between the stove, the fireplace, and blankets. We'll be okay for a few days." "A few days?" Mira echoed. "And then what?" "Then we turn on the standby generator." "How long will the propane last, if this storm continues?" "A few weeks," Lauren shrugged. "Unless we alternate." "What do you mean?" "I mean once the current solar batteries are empty, we use the generator for a few days. That will reheat the house, start the well pump again. Once the house is fully heated, we can turn the generator off and use the power station you brought for a few days. When that dies or if it gets too cold inside, we'll go back to the generator. Then we continue to alternate. Hopefully this will stretch our resources for a lot longer. And if we're lucky, the storm will stop a while to let some light get to the solar panels." "That sounds complicated," Mira frowned. "It's not ideal," Lauren agreed. "And it means there will be days we're uncomfortable, but we have plenty of food, water, and blankets. We won't freeze or starve. If it helps stretch the propane, I think it'll be worth it." Mira ran a hand over her face. "You're right. Oh, water," she said as another thought struck her. "You said the pump won't work?" "No. Not without the generator. We should have running water for maybe a day." "Okay, well that's not too concerning. We have plenty of water stored for drinking and cooking and an endless supply of snow, Mira replied with a small smile. That's the spirit, Lauren grinned and then sighed. Still, in the morning I'm thinking we should use that to fill up the bathtub. Are you seriously worried about bathing right now? Mira asked with a grin, needing to ease the concern that had fallen over both of them. A little. I'd hate to have you tell me I stink. Mira couldn't hold back a true laugh. Don't worry about it. I'm in the same boat. True. No, I meant we can have that water for the toilet tank, so well, I don't like composting toilets, Lauren replied with a shrug. Oh. Mira chuckled, but then she found herself curious. How is it you know so much about these things? A pang struck Lauren's heart that had nothing to do with fear of the storm or the lingering memory of the past life. Lauren. Mira's curiosity turned to concern seeing the sadness cross Lauren's face. Then she remembered the history of this house and she felt guilty. It's okay, you don't have to talk about it, she said soothingly. Lauren looked up and the gentle look of empathy she saw had her eyes stinging. I don't mind, but it's a long story. Mira nodded. All right, but maybe you can tell me tomorrow, if you want. She saw Lauren's nod and decided not to push any further. Anyway, she said more brightly, there's nothing more we can do right now. It won't be light out for another few hours. Lauren sighed in relief. Yeah. We should probably go back to bed. Mira agreed, even though a sudden aversion to being alone overtook her. Why don't we get our blankets and sleep out here by the stove? She asked tentatively. Lauren glanced at the sofa and the loveseat, a flicker of doubt crossing her face, but she couldn't refuse the vulnerable look in Mira's eyes. That's probably a good idea. Mira felt some of her tension ease. They went to their rooms, gathered their heavy blankets, and returned to the living room. Mira insisted Lauren take the sofa since it was her house and she was taller, leaving herself the loveseat. The house still held much of the heat from before the power went out, and after a while, they both drifted into an uneasy sleep, the wind howling steadily beyond the walls. Lauren's eyes fluttered open, and her first thought was that it was cold. Not freeze to death cold, but definitely cold. Shivering, she sat up, wincing at the ache in her back and wishing she had thought to bring an air mattress. Light streamed through the large windows, reflecting off the snow outside and filling the room with a cold, bright glow. Then she saw it. The fires had gone out. The fireplace going out wasn't so bad, as it hadn't put out much heat anyway, but the wood stove was another matter. She turned and saw Mira curled up on the small loveseat. For a moment, she let herself study her. Over the last few weeks, Mira Jarvis had somehow gone from her employer to something else. Lauren wasn't sure what that was yet or what she thought about it. They had shared things that technically hadn't happened, and now they were locked together, trying to survive a storm that had already killed them once. It was still a thought she couldn't quite grasp, but the images of Mira, bruised and betrayed, standing in the freezing cold and begging her cheating husband to let her in, had never left her. Now, Lauren thought those images would be replaced by a peaceful innocence that somehow settled the ache that had been in Lauren's heart from the first time she stepped into the cabin since her parents' deaths. A small groan brought Lauren out of her thoughts, and she had to hide a smile to see Mira sitting up, grabbing her own back. "Morning," she said with a feigned innocence. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Mira grumbled. "However, I'm pretty sure I won't be sleeping on that again." Lauren chuckled. "I agree. I think we're at the age where we are meant to be in bed." "If my back wasn't killing me, I'd protest that age comment," Mira replied. Suddenly she realized how cold it had gotten. "Okay, so maybe we get that fire going," she said, forgetting her backache. "Definitely," Lauren replied, getting to her feet. She opened the door and grimaced. "I need to clean this out first. Can you bring a bucket?" Mira had no desire to argue and delay starting the fire. She brought several logs and waited patiently as Lauren quickly emptied the ashes and debris from the stove. What do I do with this? I've got to go outside anyway, I'll take it. Go outside? Are you crazy? Mira protested. It's 20 below. I'm not jumping up and down about it, Lauren replied, but I have to make sure the chimney, the stovepipe and the vents aren't blocked. And I should also check the satellite dish. Fine, but I'm coming with you, Mira stated. You don't have to. Maybe not, but I'm going to. I'm not about to let you go out and freeze while I sit on my ass in a not quite frozen house. Lauren blinked, then laughed at the unexpected sass. Since you put it that way, how can I refuse? She got the fire started and paused to enjoy the burst of warmth coming from the flames. What about the fireplace? Mira asked. Not yet. I'll wait until I clear the chimney. For now, we'll let the wood stove do its thing. She scratched her chin as she considered her options. It's going to take a while before it's hot enough to heat water for coffee. She looked back at Mira. Want to go get the fun part over with? Might as well, Mira agreed. They went to put on the warmest clothes they could find, before putting on their snow gear. The wind had eased, but the cold hadn't. It cut through every layer the moment they stepped out. Okay. Let's get this over with, Lauren muttered through her scarf. After dumping the ash bucket, they grabbed a ladder and moved to the side of the cabin. Lauren assembled the roof rake quickly, then climbed partway up the ladder and brushed the snow from the chimney cap, making sure it was clear. She cleared what she could from the surrounding area before climbing back down. They then trudged through nearly a foot of snow, working their way from task to task. They cleared the solar panels, checked on the generator, and gathered more wood to bring back inside. Lauren also checked the well system, knowing it wouldn't be running without power. Instead, she focused on the exposed pipes where they entered the cabin, making sure they were well insulated so nothing would freeze while the system sat idle. After brushing off the porch, Mira brought in several pots packed with snow. Then they finally returned inside and quickly shed their heavy outer layers. It feels warmer already, Mira sighed in relief. Lauren didn't have the heart to tell her it only felt that way after being outside. Okay, so first things first, Mira announced. Coffee. Definitely, Lauren agreed. Mira grabbed the stainless coffee pot, tested the faucet, and was relieved to see it still running. She filled the pot and set it on top of the wood stove. The water's still working, she said as Lauren lit the fireplace. Oh good. While that's going, I'm going to go fill the bathtub with that water. It would take hours to melt enough snow for that. Okay. I'll see what we can manage for breakfast. Lauren headed to the bathroom while Mira moved into the kitchen to check her phone. She had turned it off earlier the previous day to let it charge before the power went out and had completely forgotten about it. Mira picked up the phone and frowned at the lack of signal. After a moment, she connected it to the cabin's Wi-Fi and waited. It took a few seconds, but then the screen refreshed and messages began to come through, one after another. As she scrolled, she felt a little pang of regret to notice that almost all of them were from Peter and a few from her publisher. There were no messages from family, and none from friends asking if she was safe. She supposed that wasn't surprising. She didn't have a family outside of Peter, and writing had taken up most of her life for years, so there really wasn't anyone else interested in whether she was safe or not. Shaking off the rare touch of self-pity, she opened Peter's messages. His first messages were all the same, telling her to come back or at least call so he and his family can make sure she's safe. Then the messages became more demanding, accusing her of being selfish, and eventually they turned desperate as he explained that the power and cell service were cutting in and out and they weren't prepared to last without heat. Mira continued to read, growing more irritated with every word. Mira? What is it? Lauren asked, stepping beside her. Nothing, Mira said, lowering the phone slightly. Just looking at my messages. Let me guess. Peter is still pushing you to come back and buy things while you're at it? Yes, Mira replied. And I don't know why. Even he should realize by now there probably aren't any stores open. Maybe he really does want to see you, Lauren said gently, even if the thought didn't sit well with her for more than one reason. Mira scoffed bitterly. You saw him with his little girlfriend. He doesn't want me. He wants something from me, and he's just not going to get it. Whatever it is. What are you going to do? Mira was quiet for a moment. I should call him and get it over with, she said with a sigh. There's no cell service out here, but the satellite internet should still let us make the call. I'm not sure what it's like back in town. We won't know unless we try, Lauren said. The mountains are usually the first to lose service, so maybe it's still working there. Fair enough. Mira's lips lifted as she reached for her laptop. Want to watch? She asked. I wouldn't miss it, Lauren said with a quiet chuckle. Mira pulled up the surveillance feed. She was disappointed, but not surprised, by the slow response and glitchy video. Still, it was better than nothing. They watched as the family gathered in the living room, though it was clear no one was settled. Frank sat on the sofa, already complaining about breakfast, while Grace moved quickly between the kitchen and the living room, her movements sharp with urgency. If you're so hungry, you can get in here and help, she snapped, not slowing down. We need to get this done before the power goes out again. The television continued to play the weather in the background, its volume low but constant, and the stove was on, a pan already heating. Grace is about to snap, Mira commented, not bothering to hide her amusement. Lauren snorted. It hasn't even been a week. They continued to watch as Pam got to her feet to join her mother, pausing to pull Vanessa out of Peter's arms. Hey, Vanessa protested. This isn't a hotel, Vanessa, Pam snapped, ignoring Vanessa's arguments. Mira laughed at the young blonde woman's sputtering. Finally, she dialed Peter's number. She watched as he looked at his phone and a relieved expression crossed his face when he answered. Mira, thank God, he asked, waving a hand to get Vanessa to stop talking. It's been days. Why haven't you called, or at least sent a message? I've been busy, for one thing. For another, the reception is getting worse and I rarely have any service. How are things there? Not great. The power keeps going on and off and cell service is also growing worse. The news says it's expected both would go down completely in the next day or so if the weather doesn't let up. That's too bad, Mira replied, half-heartedly. She looked as Lauren went to the wood stove and smiled, gesturing at the pot indicating the water was hot and it was time for coffee. So I guess the snow is even worse there? Peter asked, pulling her attention back the screen. He was looking at his father and Brad who were mouthing something and he just kept waving them off. Yes. So, no, I'm not coming back. Okay, I get it, but you're here more than I am. Do you know if we have any non-electric heat or anything? I bought some heaters but they're electric and if the power goes off. I would think you would have expected that, Peter. The power goes out at least once every winter when you're usually home. Peter scowled, and Mira found it entertaining watching him try to hold back his temper. Tell her to stop being obnoxious, Frank called angrily from the sofa, and tell us if she was smart enough to buy any propane heaters. Mira stiffened. Really, Peter, does your family have any manners at all? She snapped. There was a clang from the kitchen and Lauren had to step away to hide her laughter at the furious glare that had appeared on Grace's face. Forget it, Peter said, shooting Frank a warning glance. But he was right about one thing. Are there any backup furnaces? I mean, it's 20 below outside. If the power goes out and it stays out for more than a few hours, we'll freeze. Anger raced through Mira, so sharp it made her dizzy. In the last life, he had beaten her and Lauren and threw them into the cold. He hadn't cared even a little about how she and Lauren would stay warm. He hadn't cared when they had suffered through the unbearable cold, huddled together but far too frozen to generate any real heat, until their bodies had simply stopped. Mira? Lauren called softly, knowing very well what had caused the fury on Mira's face. Mira exhaled sharply. She considered saying, no. That it was their fault for not being prepared and that between the 6 of them, there was enough hot air to warm the entire house, but she didn't. Whatever the past life held, whatever betrayal she'd faced in this life, she refused to carry the burden of 6 lives, no matter how little they deserved the help. Yes, she finally said. Peter visibly relaxed. Finally, she did something right, Pam called. Myra's jaw clenched. Peter, if you'd like me to tell you where those furnaces and the butane stove are, you'll advise your family and your mistress to keep their yaps closed. Mistress? Peter asked, his voice catching. Don't even try, Peter. I already told your mother I know all about Vanessa, so let's just skip over that denial, shall we? Peter ran a hand through his hair. Fine. Just tell us where everything is. Fighting her instincts, she relented. There are 2 propane heaters along with extra tanks and a camping stove. Oh, thank God, Peter sighed. Thanks, I'll. Wait a minute, Mira interrupted. What? Just a bit of advice. Those heaters and the stove run on propane. You'll need to use them sparingly and crack a window. Is she crazy? Vanessa's voice cut in. What's the point of a heater if we have to open a window? Mira rolled her eyes and glanced at Lauren, who had just brought her a steaming cup of coffee. I didn't know you had a fondness for dimwits, Peter. Peter scowled. Watch what you say, Mira, he warned. Or what? Mira replied coolly. Look, never mind. I gave you the warning. If you choose to ignore it, my conscience is clear. She disconnected before he could say anything else. Almost as if the universe itself had grown tired of the Jarvis family, the light from the television flickered once before going black, followed immediately by the loss of the camera feed. Well, the fun begins for them, Mira commented dryly. Do you think he'll listen to your advice? Lauren asked. Mira closed her laptop and lifted her cup. If he's smart, he will. If he's stupid, they'll die, she said with a small shrug. That doesn't bode well for them, then, Lauren replied, drawing a surprised laugh from Mira. Deciding they were too hungry to wait for the wood stove to cook breakfast, Mira went to get the camping stove and a bottle of propane while Lauren removed the thick piece of insulation from the kitchen window and cracked it open. Working quickly, they made scrambled eggs and bacon, more than they would normally eat, and filled a large insulated thermos with coffee. Once the stove was off, Lauren closed the window and placed the padded insulation back into the frame. The smell of bacon soon filled the room, cutting through the lingering chill and bringing a warmth that only bacon could provide, at least in Mira and Lauren's minds. They took their plates into the living room and ate by the stove, talking lightly about the situation back at Myra's house. When they were finished and the dishes cleaned, they added more logs to both fires and settled back onto the sofa, instinctively sitting close to each other to share a blanket. Lauren poured them each a cup of coffee, but she could feel Myra's eyes on her the entire time. What? She finally asked, handing Mira a cup. Myra's face warmed at being caught, but her curiosity outweighed her embarrassment. Earlier, I asked how you knew about the electrical setup here, she said. You told me you'd explain later. And it's later. Lauren stiffened, her gaze drifting to the small photo of her parents sitting on a bookshelf. You don't have to, Mira said quickly, not wanting to bring up painful memories. Lauren sighed and offered a small smile to Mira. It's okay. Maybe it's time I did. Mira nodded. You told me a little about your parents and their rather unique preference for mountain living during the winter, but I know almost nothing about you, except that you have an amazing heart. Lauren's eyes dropped to her lap, unsettled by Myra's words. And an amazing talent with a toilet brush, she added with a wry smile. Mira chuckled. Well, to be honest, not really, she replied. Lauren's eyes flew up, an inexplicable need to defend her work ethic. Excuse me? Myra's chuckle grew into a full laugh. Relax, I was teasing you. Now tell me, how do you know all about wiring, solar, and everything else we've had to adjust to? I used to be an electrician, Lauren admitted. Mira blinked, wondering for a moment if she had misheard, though she knew she hadn't. She had often wondered what Lauren had done before cleaning houses, but being an electrician had never crossed her mind. An electrician? Really? She finally said. Lauren frowned slightly. And why not an electrician? She asked, a hint of defensiveness slipping into her tone. I studied hard and worked my ass off to get certified. That's not what I meant, Mira said quickly. I know how hard you work at everything you do and I'm not doubting you. It just surprised me. Although with everything you've managed to set up here, it probably shouldn't have. Sorry. I didn't mean to snap. There's no need. So, tell me, how did you go from being an electrician to cleaning houses? Lauren let out a quiet breath before speaking, her voice softer now. She quietly explained that the cabin had been her parents' vacation home and her most important project. She had poured everything she had into it, making sure they stayed safe and comfortable during their winter visits. It had been finished just one winter before they died in a car accident. After that, she hadn't been able to return to the cabin. The work that had once driven her had lost its meaning to her, so she'd stepped away rather than risk doing something half-hearted that could hurt someone. For a while, she had been unsure what to do next. Then she had seen Mira's ad on social media. It had been different. Simple, but different enough that she thought she could manage it while she figured out how to find her way back. Mira was silent for a long moment, not surprised that Lauren wasn't looking at her. Almost feeling her pain, she cautiously reached out and took her hand. Thank you for sharing that with me, she said softly. And I know what it's like to lose your parents. I hate the reason, but I'm really glad you answered that ad. Lauren looked at their entwined fingers, then up at Mira. She gave her hand a small squeeze before a smirk tugged at her lips. Me too. Having tasted your cooking, you might have eventually poisoned yourself. Mira swatted her shoulder. I hate you, she grumbled. Liar, Lauren replied with a soft laugh. The rest of the day passed in steady, practical work. They kept a close eye on the battery levels and inverter, checking them often as the hours went by. Water was moved from storage into the kitchen and living room, and out of boredom, they even managed to do a bit of cleaning. Lunch was simple. They heated a pot of soup on the camping stove, once again cracking the window just long enough to cook before sealing the warmth back inside. Later, using one of Mira's hand crank generators, they managed to power a brief weather update. The connection was weak, the audio cutting in and out, but it was enough to catch the important part. The storm was expected to continue, but the front had begun to move slowly, and within the next 2 days there could be a temporary break in the snow. It wasn't much, but it was something. They passed the late afternoon talking about their plans for the next few days and reading, trying to ignore the conditions outside. Dinner was much the same as lunch, simple and warm. By nightfall, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped further, the warmth from the wood stove and fireplace holding steady, but only just. When it grew late, neither of them made a move toward the bedrooms, knowing they would be colder than in the living room. Mira hesitated, the memory of their final hours in the last life creeping in at the edges of her mind, cold and unwelcome. We're going to have to sleep out here again, she said finally. But maybe not the couch this time, she added, instinctively rubbing her back. Lauren glanced at her, then at the sofa, and gave a small, knowing smile. Probably for the best. Together, they pulled one of the mattresses into the living room, setting it near the stove where the heat was strongest. It took some effort, but the result was worth it. They propped themselves up against the sofa and settled in under the blankets, close enough to share the warmth, and watched a downloaded movie until they couldn't stay awake any longer. Outside, the wind continued its relentless howl. Inside, they slept. The simple presence of the other bringing a quiet comfort neither of them had realized they needed.